The threat was delivered quietly. No dramatic press conference, no raised voice, just a single paragraph in a prepared statement that landed on trading floors like a bomb. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that his government is prepared to impose export restrictions on energy, critical minerals, and electricity flowing to the United States. The restrictions would take effect within 60 days unless Washington reverses its latest round of tariffs. American economists immediately began calculating the impact. The numbers are staggering. Consumer prices across the United States could spike by double digits within months. Heating bills in northern states could double. Manufacturing costs could surge to levels not seen since the 1970s oil shocks. And there is nothing Washington can do to stop it. This is not a negotiating tactic. This is economic warfare. And Canada just proved it has weapons the United States never took seriously. To understand the magnitude of what Carney threatened, you need to understand how deeply American infrastructure depends on Canadian resources. This dependency was built over decades. It was considered a strength. Two friendly neighbors sharing resources efficiently. No one in Washington imagined it could become a vulnerability. That imagination has now been forcibly expanded. Start with electricity. The United States imports more electricity from Canada than from all other countries combined. Northern states from Maine to Washington depend on Canadian hydropower to keep their lights on and their factories running. During peak demand periods, this imported power prevents blackouts that would otherwise cascade across regional grids. New England is particularly exposed. The region imports roughly 17% of its electricity from Quebec. There is no alternative source that could replace this supply quickly. Building new generation capacity takes years. Connecting to other regional grids would require infrastructure that does not exist. If Canada restricts electricity exports to New England, the region faces a choice between rolling blackouts and electricity prices that triple or quadruple overnight. Now consider natural gas. Canada supplies a significant portion of the natural gas consumed in the American Midwest and Pacific Northwest. This gas heats homes, it fuels power plants, it provides feedstock for chemical manufacturing and fertilizer production. The pipelines that carry this gas southward cannot be quickly redirected. They flow in one direction, from Canada to the United States. If those pipelines reduce their flow, American natural gas prices spike immediately. Futures markets have already priced in the possibility. Since Carney's announcement, natural gas contracts for delivery in northern states have surged by 30%. This is traders betting that the threat is real. This is money saying that Canada might actually do it. Then there is oil. Canada is the largest source of foreign oil imported into the United States, larger than Saudi Arabia, larger than all of OPEC combined. The pipelines connecting Alberta's oil sands to American refineries represent one of the most significant energy relationships on the planet. American refineries on the Gulf Coast were specifically designed to process heavy Canadian crude. They cannot easily switch to other sources. Carney did not threaten to cut off oil exports entirely. He threatened something more sophisticated. He announced that Canada would impose an export tax on oil shipments to the United States. The tax would start at 15% and increase by 5% each month until American tariffs are removed. This approach keeps the oil flowing but raises its cost. American consumers pay higher gasoline prices. American refineries pay higher input costs. The pain compounds over time. The critical minerals threat may be the most consequential in the long term. Canada possesses enormous reserves of lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, and rare earth elements. These materials are essential for electric vehicle batteries, smartphones, military equipment, and advanced manufacturing. The United States has been counting on Canadian supplies to reduce dependence on Chinese sources. Carney's statement indicated that export permits for critical minerals would be reviewed for national interest considerations. This is diplomatic language with sharp edges. It means Canada can slow or stop mineral exports whenever it chooses. It means American manufacturers cannot count on Canadian supply chains. It means the billions of dollars in electric vehicle investments announced for American factories suddenly face raw material uncertainty. The White House response revealed how unprepared Washington was for this moment. President Trump held an impromptu press conference in which he called Carney's threat an act of economic aggression that would not stand. He promised retaliation. He suggested that the United States could simply take what it needs. He referenced American military strength in terms that made diplomats across the world extremely uncomfortable. But rhetoric is not policy, and policy options are remarkably limited. The United States cannot quickly replace Canadian energy imports. Building new pipelines takes years and faces enormous regulatory and legal obstacles. Increasing domestic production requires investment that oil companies have been reluctant to make. Importing liquefied natural gas from overseas is possible, but expensive and logistically complex. Every alternative costs more and takes longer than simply maintaining the Canadian relationship. The United States cannot easily replace Canadian critical minerals either. Developing new domestic mines requires permits that take a decade to obtain. Recycling existing materials cannot scale fast enough. Importing from other countries means depending on supply chains that run through China or nations aligned with Beijing. Every alternative path leads somewhere uncomfortable. This is the leverage Carney is now deploying. It was always there. It was always visible to anyone who looked at the trade data. But American policymakers convinced themselves it did not matter. They convinced themselves that Canada needed American markets too badly to ever use this leverage. They convinced themselves that economic interdependence flowed only in one direction. The assumption was that Canada had no choice. The reality is that Canada has options the United States lacks. Consider what happens if Canada actually imposes these restrictions. In the short term, Canadian producers lose revenue from reduced American sales. This is painful, but it is survivable. Canada can redirect some energy exports to Asian markets through existing and planned pipeline and port infrastructure. Canada can stockpile critical minerals while developing processing capacity for direct export to non-American buyers. Canada can import electricity from other sources to replace power currently exported southward. The adjustments are difficult, but manageable. Canada is a wealthy nation with strong institutions and a diversified economy. It can absorb the transition costs. The United States faces a different calculation. American consumers experience immediate price increases on essentials: heating, transportation, electricity. Food prices rise as fertilizer costs increase. Manufacturing costs rise as energy inputs become more expensive. The inflationary impact spreads through every sector of the economy. This is not theoretical. Economists at major institutions have been modeling exactly this scenario since Carney's announcement. The consensus estimate suggests American consumer prices would increase by 8 to 12% within 6 months of Canadian restrictions taking effect. For an economy already struggling with inflation concerns, this would be catastrophic. The political implications are equally severe. Price spikes on gasoline and heating fuel are among the most politically toxic economic events. Voters notice immediately. Voters blame whoever is in power. Voters do not care about the complex policy decisions that led to the crisis. They care that filling their tank costs twice what it did last year. Trump built his political brand on economic nationalism. He promised that tariffs would bring prosperity and that foreign nations would bear the costs. Carney is now demonstrating that foreign nations can impose costs of their own. The narrative of American strength confronts the reality of American vulnerability. Some voices in Washington are urging escalation. They argue that the United States should respond to Canadian threats with overwhelming economic force, freeze Canadian assets, sanction Canadian banks, impose complete trade embargoes, show Canada that defiance carries consequences. This approach fundamentally misunderstands the situation. Canada has already accepted that the economic relationship with the United States is damaged. Carney is not threatening restrictions because he wants to preserve the status quo. He is threatening restrictions because the status quo has already been destroyed by American tariffs. Additional American pressure does not change his calculus. It confirms it. Escalation also carries risks that extend far beyond the bilateral relationship. American allies worldwide are watching how Washington handles this dispute. If the United States responds to Canadian leverage with the kind of overwhelming force normally reserved for adversaries, every ally recalculates their relationship. Every ally asks whether partnership with America means accepting subordination. Every ally looks for alternatives. China is watching with particular interest. Beijing has long argued that American alliances are exploitative relationships disguised as partnerships. Beijing has claimed that Washington demands obedience rather than offering genuine cooperation. The Canada situation provides evidence for this narrative. Every escalatory American action validates Chinese arguments and opens doors for Chinese engagement. The path out of this crisis is not through force, it is through negotiation. But negotiation requires acknowledging that the other party has legitimate interests and genuine leverage. This is precisely what Trump has refused to do. Throughout the trade conflict, American officials have treated Canadian concerns as irrelevant. They have dismissed Canadian objections as whining. They have assumed that Canadian threats were bluffs that would never be called. This posture made diplomacy impossible. It created the conditions for exactly the confrontation now unfolding. Carney has been clear about what Canada wants. Remove the tariffs. Return to the negotiated framework of the USMCA. Treat Canada as a partner rather than a subordinate. These demands are not radical. They represent the restoration of a relationship that functioned successfully for decades before Trump decided to blow it up. The question is whether Washington can accept these terms without viewing acceptance as defeat. The question is whether Trump can reverse course without appearing weak. The question is whether American politics permits the kind of pragmatic adjustment that the situation requires. Based on everything visible in American political discourse, the answer is probably no. The incentives all point toward escalation. The rhetoric has already hardened. The positions have already calcified. The off-ramps have already been passed. What comes next is a period of genuine economic confrontation between the two largest trading partners in the world. Prices will rise. Supply chains will fracture. Industries will suffer. Workers will lose jobs. And both nations will discover that economic warfare, like military warfare, produces casualties on all sides. The difference is that one side saw this coming and prepared for it. One side built alternatives. One side understood its leverage and positioned itself to use that leverage effectively. The other side assumed it could not happen, and now it is happening. Carney did not want this confrontation. Canada did not seek this crisis. But when a neighbor spends years demonstrating that they cannot be trusted, eventually you stop trusting them. When a partner repeatedly shows that they view partnership as domination, eventually you look for other partners. When threats become the only language spoken, eventually you learn to speak that language back. The prices American consumers are about to pay are not the result of Canadian aggression. They are the result of American choices. They are the bill coming due for policies that treated the closest ally as the nearest target. They are the cost of assuming that strength alone determines outcomes in a world where interdependence creates vulnerabilities that strength cannot solve. Trump wanted to demonstrate American power. He is about to receive a demonstration of its limits.